go. Another Crash Out podcast with a fantastic guest right now. Ben Westhoff is a journalist. We've been in touch for several years in the same world of drugs, crime, and hip hop. He's a big fan of hip hop. His Substack is called Drugs and Hip Hop, two subjects we're fascinated by. And he has got a great book. It's been out for a couple of years, which is a real important work. There you go, Fentanyl Inc., which is a great book about fentanyl. He was one of the first journalists, maybe the first journalist to really do this. Go to China, look at the industry, trace it back, do a big story. So he's really one of the authoritative voices on the issue of fentanyl, which is now enormously important in the United States, in the world, but in the United States, one of the worst overdose epidemics in global history in the United States right now. 110,000 people dying of overdoses in a year, with 70% of those dying from fentanyl or similar opioids. So, and Ben is following on all the latest stuff as well. The latest developments, what's happening right now with all of this, new stuff right now in January 2024 with the issue. So get into it. How you doing there, Ben?
Good, Ioan. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. Always good to be in touch. And Ben's over there in St. Louis, which is another fascinating city with its own stories of violence. And he's also got great.
Probably more dangerous than where you are in Mexico.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's probably close though.
No. Actually, Mexico City. I say this. I wrote a story about Mexico City's got a lower murder rate than many U.S. cities, especially than St. Louis. Although I travel around a lot to the crazy places which have the to Zacatecas and Tijuana and Juarez and these kind of places. But yeah, Ben's also got some great work on St. Louis. Another book we could talk about a bit. Little Brother, which is about is that in St. Louis, Little Brother?
Yeah, about
Which
my mentee in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program who was murdered in 2016, and so I went on a quest to solve the murder after the police failed.
another crazy story. Let's get into that story as well in a bit. But let's start off with the Fentanyl Inc. I'll flash it up again. So first tell people about how you got involved in the issue of fentanyl, when and how you first heard about
Well,
this.
I had a friend die from fentanyl way back in 2010, before I'd even heard of fentanyl, and it was mostly he actually died from the patches, the prescription patches, and so that was like a big thing in Missouri, back in the day, as people would steal these from pharmacies, or I don't know how they even always got them, but later it transitioned to the illicit fentanyl powder, and I heard that was all coming from China, but there was no reporting about it at all. And so as a reporter and personally, it captured my interest. So I ended up going to China. I pretended to be a drug trafficker, and I went inside these labs, one in Shanghai, where they were making like all these crazy fentanyl analogs, K2 and spice. And I just made up this whole story. I said I was from New York. I said my name was Johnny Webster. I said it was actually my friend who had the organization.
Rewind a second because this is so fascinating. I want to get into this a little bit more slowly. This 2010 is very early for a fentanyl death. Now, I first heard about fentanyl probably about 2014, I would say, around that kind of time. I kind of first started hearing about it being made in Mexico and stuff. Was that at that time? Was it being sold illegally, or you say it was he got it from the doctor?
Yeah, it was a legal pharmaceutical patch, but it had been diverted, and I think he got it from a drug dealer, some Missouri hillbilly probably, who maybe sold it on the black market.
Okay, so you saw this build up now. So this is kind of very early on. You're on the case with the story. Now, what year was it where you commissioned the book and you took this trip to China? after you had the book commission. Is that correct? Once you said to the publisher, "I'm going to look at fentanyl," then you went to China.
Yeah, I went to China in 2018, and that was I had my book contract by that time, and I really wanted to investigate this world because I started investigating it just by Googling buy fentanyl online, and there were like hundreds of websites came up from, they were all based out of China, and it was very easy to engage with the salespeople because, a lot of their customers were Westerners and they all spoke English. So I would get up at like 4 in the morning, US time to talk with these salespeople in China that were just getting off work. And then we developed a rapport. And I said, like, if I ever came to China, could I visit your lab? And some of them said yes.
No, no, just for people to understand this, this in 2018 is different from now. We're kind of getting into this, but now you, Chinese labs are not selling fentanyl. That they were selling it in 2018. The law changed since then. Now they're selling precursors. So, okay, you went to China, and you went to these labs, and you say you created a fake name and said you were a drug dealer. Now, did you say you were a drug dealer or did you hint at being a drug dealer? How did you get that across? And what was did you
I,
kind of do an undercover style personality, false moustache, or how was your changing there?
No, I'm a terrible actor. I couldn't do anything to pretend, but I did say it was actually my friend who was the drug trafficker. So I said, I just happened to be in China, and my friend said if I could check out these labs for him, if it met with my seal of approval, then he would order a big quantity from these labs. So that's how I presented myself.
Okay, now at that time, how much were they selling the fentanyl for, and how much would that be sold in the United States? Like, how big were the profits in this traffic?
Well, so you have these fentanyl analogs, which are like you probably heard of fentanyl, which is even 100 times stronger than regular fentanyl, and all these different. So fentanyl was illegal in China at the time, but all these chemists would have to do is just slightly tweak the molecule a tiny bit. You have something just as strong as fentanyl or stronger, but it was legal, technically legal. So this lab in Shanghai specialized in these type of chemicals that were just barely legal in China but banned in the West. So they would be selling for like $3,000 a kilo, maybe these fentanyl analogs, and from that you could get, I mean, literally millions of doses just from 1 kilo when it was all, stepped on and adulterated.
So $3,000 for 1 kilo, which could create whatever, let's say, what, 2 million doses, 3 million doses,
Maybe,
maybe even more. And how much would each dose sell for? Each dose you're talking about, like in a pill form, or in what form are we talking about being sold on the street?
yeah, they're sold in different ways around the country. They can be pressed into a pill or put in a gelatin capsule or sold in little baggies, but could be as cheap as $5 a dose.
So we're talking about absolutely extraordinary profits. I mean, from $3,000, you're going up to $10 million plus.
Yeah, the Mexican cartels are seeing most of that profit. And they're the ones buying all these chemicals from China. Some people buy this stuff on the dark web, individual consumers, but that's for the more kind of savvy drug dealer. And the stuff that's killing people the most is really the stuff that's going through the cartels.
Absolutely incredible. I mean, I looked for a long time at the profits of cocaine, and always like how that was crazy. You buy a key for $2,000 in Colombia, flip it for like $18,000, $15,000, on the US border. Seems like a big markup, but this is insane. Which is why the cartels moved from kind of more from plant-based drugs to pharmaceutical drugs. So, but anyway, so getting back, so you go to China, your friend's a drug dealer. Now, I guess Chinese culture is different from American culture. Do you think you could have pulled this off in an American city?
I don't know. I mean, I've done some shit, plenty of shady reporting here too, but what gave me some solace was that, unlike the work you're doing in Mexico, I mean, that's really scary to me. They have like automatic, they have real guns. In China, almost no one has guns. You know what I mean? Even the criminals, even the police don't usually have guns. I was actually most afraid of the government because I went there on a tourist visa. I did not get a journalist visa because I knew they would put a babysitter on me. They wouldn't let me go where I wanted to go. So I was most worried at customs that they were gonna like, throw me in prison. When I was with these dealers really reminded me more of like nerdy kind of like chemistry PhDs. You know what I mean? These guys weren't your traditional gangsters at all.
Right? It's crazy. So yeah, so these are they're chemists, they're pharmaceutical entrepreneurs, I guess.
Yeah.
These are not mafia. They're not people who've come off the street out of gangs. They're people who've done chemistry degrees and or chemistry masters, and they've got companies and they're trying to sell their product. Now, in their own mind, or actually, were they breaking Chinese law at the time or not? I mean, if they're selling fentanyl, which was not banned at that time, even though it's banned in the United States, and they know you're taking it to America, and you're hinting at them, which is kind of what what undercover agents do. They entrap in a crime, and you get they say, "I'm going to take this for a drug dealer," but are they actually breaking the law? Are they committing a crime if it's legal in their country?
No, this stuff is legal in China. And so they commit a crime once they try to smuggle stuff across customs into the US. And that's why one of these guys I met with was indicted, after my book came out. And there was a $5 million reward put out for information leading to his capture. But this really annoyed China, and they said, we're doing our own investigation. You're just interfering, and they never arrested this guy. This guy is still free as we speak.
Yeah, right. So okay, I mean you're picking some tough enemies as well. I mean, like you say you find Mexico more scary, but I often find governments more scary than gangsters in some ways because of the power of governments and going into a country which could be hostile to you rather than kind of dealing with gangsters. Um, okay, so you go in there now. What would you describe as the actual operations then? Are these companies which are just created out of the opportunity? They saw the opportunity of like sell fentanyl to American market, to Mexican gangsters or whatever. Like when did they begin really growing with this? Or are they departments of other big companies which are also selling, a million products to all different people?
Well, these companies are, yeah, they're entrepreneurial, so they're trying to sell whatever. They don't care if it's fake Viagra, if it's some like chemicals used in manufacturing, or if it's fentanyl. In fact, I talked to not just like the bosses of these companies, but the low-level employees, and none of them had even heard of fentanyl. I said, "Do you ever feel guilty you're selling this drug that's killing all these Americans?" And they said, "Well, we don't even know what it is." And you know what? I believe them because this media is controlled by the state there, and fentanyl isn't killing people in China. That's the big ironic thing is it's exported, but in China, it's not killing anyone. It's never in the papers. And so these companies, some of them make like literally thousands of different chemicals, and they'll do a custom synthesis, so you can tell them what to make, and they'll make it. They send you like a certificate of purity, and by all accounts, it's real. You know what I mean? Like people test these drugs and they really are 95% pure. And so there's a certain quality control even when they're making, fentanyl analogs and K2 spice, every kind of crazy synthetic chemical that's making people go crazy out there.
Okay, so your book was published in 2020, was it your book?
2019, yeah.
2019, okay. And your book came out, then you had under President Trump pressure on China to ban fentanyl. So can you describe, was that in fact after your book came out that that happened? And can you describe the process of what Trump did, what China did in that agreement?
Yeah, I actually went and presented on Capitol Hill about all this crazy stuff that the Chinese government was doing because the this was in the middle of Trump's trade war, you know, when he really started imposing tariffs and things like that. And so whenever Trump would do this, China would like raise the incentives to export fentanyl, if you can believe that. So they give something called a value-added tax rebate for exporting chemicals. It's like a tax break. And so in the middle of this their trade war, they raised that rate, and I testified on Capitol Hill, and people like could not believe this, and Trump himself actually tweeted about it, and was like really saber rattling, and crazy, it actually kind of worked because China did agree to ban all of these fentanyl analogs, and this was a really big deal at the time and everyone thought it was going to make the fentanyl problem in the US, if not go away, at least sort of fade off. But unfortunately, it was not effective because all these chemical companies, like the ones I visited, just switched over to selling precursors. So meaning the ingredients to make fentanyl.
Just
So
say it
they
one step at a time because it's quite a big, complicated story, I think, for people to understand. So your book was part of this. I think an important part of this understanding what happened. It helped was part of the thing which helped lead to this big sweeping change, and it was kind of crazy. They were selling direct the fentanyl. They weren't doing anything about it. Now Trump pressured. So you like Trump, you hate Trump. Trump was effective in this particular thing, and the Chinese government turned out to be okay. We'll do this. They didn't resist hard banning fentanyl. And so kind of big historic thing. And this was 2019, 2020. It
2019, I think, yeah.
was two different decrees. I think first they banned like four types or something, and then they banned everything, and they banned like every single type of fentanyl. And then you were saying this didn't, and in fact, it's got worse since then. So what's happened then? So what happened? So banning fentanyl didn't make a dent. What's happened since then?
Well, if you think about the precursors, you might remember there used to be all these meth labs all over United States rural areas. You heard about meth labs blowing up and stuff. And these meth cooks, like these backwoods guys, would go to the local pharmacy and would buy all the Sudafed that was in the store. And then they would melt that down to use it to make meth. So basically, that's a precursor right there. It's the most important ingredient. And so that's what these Chinese companies are now selling. And so before they would just send the fentanyl to the Mexican cartels straight away. The cartels would package it up and send it across the border. Now they just send them the ingredients, the precursors. And so that gets the cartels like 90% of the way there. So it's very simple process for them to make finished fentanyl, and then they just send that across the borders.
Okay, so now it's changed the precursor. Okay, so now we're in 2024. Now since this time, the number of deaths is just getting up, up, up. Why do you think the number of deaths is just going? I mean, what's making that line do that in terms of deaths of overdose in the United States from fentanyl?
Well, you have to go back, of course, to OxyContin and Purdue Pharma that kind of, marketed these pills as safe. And all these law-abiding people started getting hooked on OxyContin and similar drugs through their doctors. So what happened was that created millions of new addicted opioid users in the United States. So there was this huge market. So now heroin couldn't even fill that demand. So fentanyl kind of like came into the void, and all these people started switching over to illegal street drugs. And ironically, that's still happening. There was all this government measures to clamp down on opioid overprescribing to make it so doctors weren't just handing these things out like Skittles, and that's good. But people who are already addicted to these pain pills, a lot of them couldn't get their pills anymore. And that's still happening. These addictions aren't going away, but now people are turning to the black market. Middle-aged women, people you would never imagine are turning to street drugs, and it's just killing more and more people.
Okay, so just going up. So now we're in 2024, and it's worse than ever. What can be done now? I mean, is there like can there be more done pressure on China now not to sell the precursors? Or what? Well, sorry, there was a pressure, an agreement made just recently between Biden and China. So what did that do, and what will the implications of that be?
Yeah, that was focused squarely on the precursors. And so Chinese President Xi agreed to that basically, if these companies are selling precursors, they have to know who they're selling them to. They can't sell them to the cartels. That's the idea. So, you can't just ban these precursors outright because they're used in all these other things. They're used in legitimate chemicals. And so the idea is that China's cracking down, and these traffickers, like I think I told you before, they want to follow the law. That's another way they're not like Mexican gangsters at all. These companies, whatever the law is, whatever the president's saying, they'll tend to do it. And so I'm cautiously optimistic this could have some success, but the downside is these chemicals will just move to India. And so, India has a similarly huge pharmaceutical industry, just as capable of making these fentanyl precursors. And we've already seen them starting to sell to the Mexican cartels.
But now it would only really be effective if it was enforced quite stringently. So, is it simply somebody has like a plausible deniability and says, I'm a legitimate pharmaceutical company in Mexico buying a bunch of these precursors? Or are they asking for more paperwork, like really say you've got to prove and have a whole kind of story there of proving what your product is? And who's going to actually enforce this in China? Is it going to be like, is there like a Chinese DEA, or is it just like the cops, or I mean, who actually does this enforcement?
Yeah, there is a Chinese equivalent of the DEA. There's all these customs agents. But by all accounts, they're woefully understaffed. And so the enforcement has never been what it should be. But like I said, just the fact that the law has changed is enough for a lot of these companies to try to be on the right side of the law.
Now, there's this kind of conspiracy theory about this kind of reverse opium war. That China, the Americans were involved with the Brits. It was us, the Brits, who really had the opium wars, but some American traders were.
Don't pull us into that. The Americans don't have anything to do with that.
There were some American merchants as well. So the China or the West and the Chinese are kind of like, okay, you killed all our people back in the 19th century. We're going to kill your people now. Is there, in your trip to China, did you find anything supporting that? Any attitudes, anything which could support that assertion?
There's like this military white paper from the US Army that said, quote, some Chinese general talking about covert forms of warfare or atypical forms of warfare. Narcotics warfare is mentioned, but I don't know. I personally think it's just like a follow the money situation. And these Chinese chemical companies are just trying to make money. And the reason they get away with it is because these regional leaders have an incentive for these companies to make money. More profits, more taxes paid, more employment in their regions. I think the national leaders don't want China to be seen as the drug pushers to the world, and they're not trying to you know poison the West in this way so much. I think it's more just like a money-making strategy to build up the companies' chemical and pharmaceutical industries that sort of spiraled out of control.
Okay, so right now, so we've got possibly there'll be a clamp, we'll see less precursors coming out of China. There might be ways around it, still ways to do it, but possibly less there. But then it can move to India, and it could also move to Indonesia or a bunch of other countries. So, do you think the United States can or should try to stop fentanyl being trafficked to the United States?
I mean, I really don't. I really think it's a giant waste of money. I mean, I'm not saying we should just throw our hands up in the air, but there are so many federal agencies involved with this trying to stop drugs from getting into our country. I call it the new drug war because before the old war on drugs, locking people up, that's really gone way down. You know what I mean? You're not seeing nearly as many people locked up on nonviolent drug offenses, and that's great. But instead, we're spending, tens of billions of dollars every year. The DEA, it's not just the DEA, it's the Department of State, it's border control, trying to stop these drugs from coming from Mexico, from coming from China. And, we couldn't stop heroin from getting in, right? But fentanyl is 50 times more potent. So, like, that means if 50 pounds of heroin, we couldn't stop that, we're never going to be able to stop 1 pound of fentanyl. I visited the borders. There's like underground tunnels. People are using drones. There's a million ways to get drugs across the border. I think instead we need to focus on our own people who have drug problems. And there's this huge population, especially people on the edges of society, unhoused people, longtime addicted drug users who are dying from fentanyl. That's the biggest population. And we have these great medication assisted treatment drugs to help them, methadone, buprenorphine, naltrexone, but only a tiny fraction of addicted users get these drugs. And I think we should treat it like COVID, basically, like fentanyl is now killing more people than COVID, but we never treated it like this all hands on deck emergency situation. And I think that's what we need to do.
What do you think about there's it started happening in some states or some cases, much harsher penalties for street fentanyl dealers, like charging them with murder if what they sell kills people?
I mean, I understand the impulse to want to do this. A lot of these movements are led by parents who have had kids die, and they want to do something. These government agents, they want to do something, and those politicians. But unfortunately, it's just not going to make a dent. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these so-called dealers are not like kingpins or anything at all. A lot of these so-called dealers are just selling, a few baggies of drugs to support their own habits. And the idea that like they're murdering people, I mean, I just it's just going to send more addicted users into prisons where their addictions are going to get even worse. So I don't support that kind of thing.
Last question on fentanyl, and then let's talk a little bit about Little Brother and St. Louis. So, I mean, are we at rock bottom? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? I mean, it's for me, it's mind-boggling. I can't, every time I say this, but like 110,000 overdose a year is completely mind-boggling. And even though it's a big story, I feel it should be the biggest story in the United States, really. I mean, it's crazy. But is this rock bottom, or are we going to get better? Optimistic, pessimistic? What's going to happen?
Well, eventually this thing has to burn itself out, but I mean, every year I expect the number to go down and it keeps going up. So problem is, I think especially worldwide, I think we're just getting started. In Mexico, you see the number of deaths going up from drug overdose deaths, and it's been covered up. I've read a lot about this. The agencies aren't reporting it. Europe, you're starting to see some spikes, and it's not surprising because it's just an obvious profit incentive to shift from, as you were talking about, plant-based drugs to synthetic drugs because the drugs made in the lab are just so much cheaper. And it really is only a matter of time before fentanyl displaces heroin in a lot of the world. So I cannot say I'm optimistic, unfortunately.
In fact, today, the Mexican president in his morning press conference actually cited the problem of fentanyl in Mexico and the need to really fight fentanyl in Mexico and mentioning how bad it is in the United States. And so that it is something there. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left to talk about Little Brother, which is your latest book. So it was your mentee who was murdered, and your mentee was a young. How old was this idea of mentees, mentors? Is quite an American thing, I think, for many of us outside the United States don't know. So explain the program and what was your contact with him.
Yeah, big brothers, big sisters. It pairs up like a kid. He was 8 and I was 28 when we got together. And yeah, there are really no regulations. It's just like you do whatever you guys have fun together. So we would like go see hip hop music and watch bad movies and go out to eat and things like that. And we got really close. He actually lived with my wife and I over one summer, and his family lived in Ferguson, just outside of St. Louis. And he actually knew Michael Brown, who famously, when he was killed by a white police officer, it sort of started the whole Black Lives Matter movement, got it going. So when Jarrell was murdered in 2016, I like didn't see it coming at all. He kind of like hid the darker parts of his life from me. And so I didn't know who killed him, and nobody knew who killed him. His friends and family,
So
the
how how
police
old
didn't
how old was he
either.
when he was murdered?
19.
He was 19. Okay. Now we've only got a few minutes left, so I perhaps not give it. I don't want to give spoilers away. It's a fascinating book. People can check out. But is there? Do you solve the murder?
I did figure out who killed him, so that's I don't think too much of a spoiler, but that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg with everything else that happened.
Now, okay, well, I'll leave some of that for the book. It's only a couple of minutes, but just in short, I mean, how bad is gun violence in St. Louis? Describe it. I mean, it's confined to certain neighborhoods, is it, or is it a big thing? I mean, what's it like? The numbers are pretty crazy.
Yeah, well, I actually your book Blood Gun Money was actually a great resource, which I cite in the book about how these all these guns get into St. Louis. I mean, urban cities like St. Louis are just awash in these black market firearms. And Jarrell, my mentee, he had a whole like closet full of guns, and that he would just buy down the street for $50 or $100. And these guns are coming um, through these trade shows, through illegal sales, and it's a huge problem. And so in St. Louis, it's like the city is about half black and half white, and the problem is a lot worse in neighborhoods with a lot more poverty, but it's spilling over carjackings, things like that. It's pretty hairy a lot of places in St. Louis.
Now, the violence, is it mostly, would you say, gang related murders, drug related murders, or not? And how do you describe the kind of dynamics? This is a pretty short time to talk, but compared to Mexico, you've got the big cartels. What's the dynamics driving the murder rate there?
It's not sort of a strongly gang-driven culture like you heard about Los Angeles in the 80s or things like that. It's the drugs are a big part of it though, and there are various gangs who control the drug trade, and there's a lot of desperate people. It's this terrible mix of poverty sort of long time redlining, discrimination, sort of confining the poorest people to the worst neighborhoods. And it's when you combine the horrors of fentanyl and just how cheap it is, how easy it is to get addicted. I think drug overdose deaths just actually passed gun violence deaths, which is pretty crazy.
And drug overdose, like fentanyl, is hitting both the black and white sides of town.
Yeah, also, and it's in cocaine too. And I've heard about a lot of more elderly African American men, maybe in their 60s, who have been maybe addicted to cocaine for a long time, decades even, but now fentanyl is in it, and so they're starting to die in really high numbers as well.
America is going through tough times. Fantastic stuff. Where can people find your work, follow your stuff?
Well, my Substack is drugs and hip hop. It's just benwestoff.substack.com. And also my website is just benwestoff.com.
Fantastic. We'll check it out again. Flash it up there. Fentanyl Inc. and Little Brother. So I don't have on to flash up, but I'll flash a photo of it on the screen. Probably looking at it right now. And great to be here with Ben Westoff. Talk again, keep in touch. Let's follow up on this issue. And hopefully those pessimistic ideas are not going to play out. But I feel pretty pessimistic myself. But what do they say? You got to... pessimism of the mind, optimism of the heart, I think is this thing.
I like that. Yeah.
I like that phrase. I don't necessarily believe all the things the guy said. But anyway, see you later. Peace and love, everybody. And just find the truth about these issues. So outro, boom, and talk soon.